Hello, this is Craig with Carshalton Advisory. Thank you for joining me here as we go through part 2 in our review of Chapter 4 from Collie and Singh's Power Pivot and Power BI Excel User's Guide. Now, as a quick point of review, in the first section of the video, we went through how to import an Excel table, a comma separated or a text file. In this case, it was a CSV style text file, as well as pasting values into our Power Pivot window. So if you missed that first video, go back and watch it right now. Also, don't forget to download the special sample file that I created that's going to let you work through all of these examples. Again, the kind of the one weakness I found with this the data files that came with the book is that they kind of showed the ending position but didn't reflect the starting point. So this way, with that file, you're going to have a starting point and going to be able to continue to work through all these examples with us. So today what we're going to be working on is how to import data from a database, which is really where Power Pivot and Power Query excel. So let's get started with that. All right, so what we're going to do is open up our Power Pivot window. And if you remember, there's two ways that we can do that. One is by selecting the Data tab, and this little green icon is our Power Pivot window box. The second is by going to our Power Pivot tab and clicking Manage. So we'll click that right now and open up our Power Pivot window. All right, so here's how we left our Power Pivot from the last lesson. And in it we have two tables. One is the budget, and one is the example of data that I had just pasted in. Now I'm going to delete our paste example right now, as we're not going to need that in the future. So this is a permanent move, so always make sure that you really do want to get rid of it. So I'm going to hit yes here, and so now that paste table is gone. So let's start importing from a database. So in this case, there is a prominent icon right at the top that's going to tell us that we can get external database from, external data from a database. So I'm going to click that, and in this case, they've provided us with an access file with the data that they use as they work through the examples in the book. So I will select from access here, and there we go. There is our table import wizard. It is, the first thing we're going to do is browse and find out to let it know where the location is. So in this case, I have that in the same directory, and it's called book data. So find that on your computer and double click it to highlight. Next, we'll hit next. All right, gives us an option here of either selecting from a list of tables and views or writing a query. So if you're comfortable with writing queries for access, you can go in and do that. In this case, the authors of the book have provided us with sample tables that will be quick and easy for us to insert. I'm going to click next again. All right, so there's going to be three tables that we're going to need to import in order to match up with the book examples. The first one is the one that's highlighted, which is the customer table. So I'm going to toggle that one on. This friendly name, this is where the Power Pivot grabs the tab name for our table name. So I'm going to change this just to customer to match what's in the other examples. And now I'm going to click Finish. We don't have to make any other changes with this table. All right, so it's going to take a few seconds here to process. It tells me that it's successful, and we'll hit Close. And now we should see a second table in our Power Pivot window. Okay, perfect. So we started with budget, which had 1,800 rows, almost 1,900. Now we go to customer, and now we're up to almost 20,000 rows. And you saw how quick and easy that process was. I'll scroll this down just so we can see a few more of them. All right, so that's one of the three tables that we're going to require. Now, let's get our next two. Now, we can do this a little bit easier than going right from the From Database import wizard. Because we already have a connection established there, we can select existing connections to speed things up a little bit. So let's click on this. All right, we already see that there's a few data connections already. One is that CSV file that we had used previously, and there's the path to it. The other is this access data. So let's click that. We'll click open. We'll select from a list of tables. Now in this case, we're going to choose the internet sales one, which is right down near the bottom. Now this one is going to be a little more involved. We won't just be able to pull the table as is, or else it won't match up what is in the example files that they've provided to us. So, but it's a great opportunity for us to learn and demonstrate how to do it. So I've renamed it to sales. And this time I'm going to select preview and filter. If I would have just hit finish, it would have pulled all of the columns into my model for me. And one thing to remember with Power Pivot is there's no point pulling in any extra columns that you aren't going to need. So let's filter this. All right, so now we can see all of the columns that are available to in this table. All right, I'm just going to expand this a little bit. Okay, so the first thing, I'm going to click the top left tick box, and that's going to deselect all of my columns for me. And what we're going to do is just select the ones that we want to keep. So we're going to want to keep this first one, which is product key. We'll keep order date. We are going to keep customer key. Now notice when I highlight over it, it shows me the full name. We want order quantity, which I'm going to scroll over for. Okay, here's order quantity, unit price, extended amount, and product cost. And sales amount. Excuse me. There's product cost. And here's sales amount. So that, if we import these rows, it'll match up with the book examples. So now that we've highlighted all of those, I'll click OK. And it's noted here that there have been some filters applied. And let's click Finish. All right, so in about 3 seconds there, it prepared over 60,000 rows of data. We'll close that. So now we have a new table in our Power Pivot called Sales. So again, budget we started with from the Excel file. Customer, we pulled in all of the columns. Sales, we filtered some through. And we have over 60,000 records. So let's pull up our final table. Again, I've clicked existing connections. Let's open that same file again. We'll hit next. This time we're going to select product master. Again, we're going to have to filter this. Now I will put a list of all the columns in the description for this video so that you don't necessarily have to follow along as I read them out here. The other thing I'm going to do is spread these out automatically. All right, so the first thing that we are going to want is actually quicker just to note the ones that we don't want. So we do not want alternate key. We do not want subcategory. And then other than that, it is the non-English names. So we'll get rid of the Spanish and the French. And we will scroll over. There's a bunch more over to the right. So we'll keep the English description, but we will not include any of the others. Now, if you're fluent in any of these dialects, certainly you may want to keep them, but it won't tie into what's in the book as it was printed. All right, so we've removed all of the non-English languages, and then the alternate key, and the subcategory key. We'll click OK. Again, it notes that there's applied filters. Let's retype our friendly name here, and we're just going to call this products to match the book files, and click finish. All right, so it's pulled it. In this case, there's only almost 400 rows. We'll hit close. And now we have our fourth table. So if you were to stop now, that would be fine. You'll have a file that should match up with what the Chapter 4 load data example from the authors look like. But you should have a much better understanding of how they got to that point. However, it's probably worthwhile to highlight some of the things that they went over in the textbook as well. There are additional ways to pull data in here. So, we've done 4 types so far, but you can also pull from a data source. So those are things like SharePoint lists, reporting services reports, cloud services like Azure, and other sorts of data feeds that you might find. I've not gone into that, and I'm not going to because it's not in this chapter of the textbook. But if you're using those other data feeds in your regular professional responsibilities, you can include these in a very similar manner to what we've done. Now, the advantage of using a database like we have done is that there's nearly limitless amounts of data that we can use. We can add columns later, which is something that we couldn't do with some of the other styles. You can change the types of views to different servers. You can pull from a different database. You can pull from different tables. And again, those were things that we weren't able to do with other retrieval methods. We can have calculated columns. So we can calculate columns inside of Power Pivot, which is something we'll do in future chapters. But in this case, we can actually have the database do the number crunching for us and just pull out over the result. Ideally, using databases really plays to the strengths of Power Pivots. So it's something that, if possible, you're going to want to use this method of loading data as much as possible. All right. The downside of loading from databases is that you may not always have them. And you can't switch between different database types. So for example, you can't switch from an Access to a SQL server. A couple other tips that are in the chapter. One is to make sure you rename your tables and columns up front. So if you remember, I wanted to change that name of the tables here from what the default was, just to make it simple for me in the future. It's important to do that before we load the data. Same thing when we pulled in our budget table. We wanted to make sure that that we had the column names all set up, as well that we wanted to name the budget table itself. We don't want to pull in any more columns than needed, which is why we went through the process of filtering our database selection. And that wraps up for what we have here for Chapter 4. Don't hesitate to go through this again if you want. But also, if you thought this was worthwhile, click subscribe. Give this a thumbs up. I'm going to continue on through the remainder of the chapters of the book that this would be appropriate for. And this way, hopefully, both you and I will have a much better understanding of the capabilities and opportunities available through Power Pivot, Power Query, and Power BI. Thanks for watching.